So first thing I want to talk about is the schedule. The final exam will be a week from Tuesday from 10:30 to 1. And it's going to be taken in Canvas, just like a regular module exam. But notice we do not have a 24-hour window. So you have to start at this time and you have to be done by 1 p.m. Even if you have time left, it's going to kick you out. So make sure you know this exact time and you are ready to start the final exam at that point. If you do have any concerns about this time, or maybe you have accommodations or questions or whatever, ask me as soon as you can so we can hopefully figure out a solution now instead of like the day of the exam. What else? It's going to be essentially the same format as previous module exams, except it's going to be 2.5 hours long, which means there's 25 questions instead of the usual 10. But those questions are sort of the same style as they always are. You know, you got the few where you type in a number, and the other ones where it's like multiple choice, and that's pretty much it. And just like a regular exam, you can use any of your notes or spreadsheets or old homeworks or whatever. All the same rules that apply to a module exam apply to this final exam, other than the fact that it's different and you have to take it in this little 2.5-hour window. Now, these 25 questions are sort of broken up into 3 sections. The first 15 are related to part 1, which we will talk about in a moment. The next 5 are going to be similar to part 2, but for those 5 questions, you're going to have to download a new spreadsheet during the exam. So when you're going through those questions or reviewing or whatever, just make sure you're able to answer those questions on the fly and type in the code during an exam. You don't have to rely on something you've already built. And then the last 5 questions are multiple choice, and they are covering just general Excel knowledge, but you don't have any examples of these guys. So how should we prepare for this exam? Well, the best way to prepare is essentially like we do every module, where you start by doing the workbook questions and then the 2 homework assignments, of which I believe are both due next Wednesday. But on this one, you might also want to consider looking at the course competency page on Canvas, which I'll show you where that is. So there we are. On the modules page of Canvas at the top, above all our modules, if there's general information, one of the links is this course competency link, which takes us here. And it has this general information about each one of these modules. Although I like to scroll about halfway down and look at this module outcomes section, I just think it does a better job of summarizing what we've done. It sort of breaks up each module into 3 different parts, has like the mathematical formulas we may have used, talks about the Excel functions we may have used in those modules, and it's just a good checklist of things you should go over, because we're not really doing anything new in this final exam. It's all old tools and techniques from Excel that we're utilizing to solve these questions. And so this is a good place to remind yourself what those are. For example, in module 2, we had the choral function, we had the sum function, we had the percent change formula, which is that new minus old over old guy. And so, like I said, it's just a good place to remind yourself of things that may or may not pop up on the final exam. Now, I do want to point out this list isn't perfect. It's a little outdated. Like, for example, it says VLOOKUP in module 3, and we used XLOOKUP. So if you're confused about one of these, just ask me. But essentially, if you see something like that, like floor, which I didn't talk about, you can just skip it. We used round down, which is essentially the same thing as floor. So there's a few minor changes, but for the most part, this is a great place to look for things that we've covered this semester. Okay, what else? What are we up to up until that point? Well, today, Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, we're sort of still having sort of our usual class and attendance. We don't have class Friday, and that's because it's designated as a reading day so that people have like an open day to begin studying for finals. It will also have regular office hours next week, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. And since there's like no new Excel material being taught in this particular module, I'm basically just here to answer questions. So you're just sitting here these days working through the workbook or homework, and I'm just hanging out, ready to help you out if you get stuck. And like I already mentioned, every question uses stuff we've already learned, but you do not need to rely on old spreadsheets. So you don't have to worry about any question on the exam being like, open up the income tax spreadsheet and type in 100,000. What are your taxes? It's not going to be like that. All the questions are going to relate to these spreadsheets we're going to look at in a second. Well, more or less. The part 2 is technically a new spreadsheet during the exam, but it's very similar to the one that you currently have. I'm also not going to be going over my own spreadsheet, but again, you're still welcome to ask questions about your own. I can help you out. There's also going to be final exam week office hours that are different than the usual office hours. They're going to be posted on Canvas. You can go to any of those, not just my own. My own, which are going to be like the day before the exam, I think from like 8 to 10, so sort of like our normal class time. And you can always email me questions as well. So that is sort of this general information about the final exam. Let's take a look at the actual materials. So for part 1, we have this spreadsheet here, which is broken up into 4 tabs. What's going on in this spreadsheet is we're running a candy store and we're doing good. We already have a couple stores. We know how much we're selling, but we would like to grow our company and have more and more stores. And we want to make projections about if we continue growing at our current rate, what we could expect to have 7 or 10 years down the line. So at first, it just tells us the price that we're going to sell 1 unit of our candy in these stores. And it also tells us how much it costs to produce this candy. But then on the remaining 3 tabs are these actual tables where we're going to make these projections into the future. For example, we currently have this many convenience, grocery, and whatever a mass store is. And maybe we have some contracts for next year's stores. But starting in year 2, we are going to make the prediction that the amount of stores that are going to carry our product is going to increase by about 9% a year. And this means we're going to get weird decimal numbers for the amount of stores, but that's okay. We just want to have a nice, smooth projection. It's just an estimate about the future, not the actual amount of stores. Also, once we know how many stores are going to carry our product, these numbers over to the right will tell us how many units of our product are in each of those stores, and that'll allow us to figure out how many total units we're going to sell down here, and we add them all up, which will eventually allow us to compute our revenue. On the 3rd tab is an additional type of cost that's not just the production cost. This is operating costs, and maybe it's like how much it costs us to, run these stores or pay our employees or whatever. These are our costs. We know the first 2 years, just kind of like before, and then starting from year 2, it's going to increase by about 5%. And then last of all is this summary table, which will take some of the previous information from before and some new information so that we can ultimately get profit. So total units, we've actually already computed that on the units tab. Wholesale price, that's that 35 cents per unit number. And revenue is actually the first new thing on this tab. Revenue, though, is very simple. You just use the 2 rows above it. It says units times price. That's always what revenue is. Cost of goods, that's where you're going to use this other information on the pricing tab. And operating costs, we've already calculated that on the operating cost tab. And then last of all, they give us a formula to compute profit that we're going to use to fill in the final row. So all in all, it's actually not too bad to fill out all 3 of these fairly quickly. On the other hand, on the part 2 spreadsheet, it looks very similar to something we've done in the past. This is like another survey where we have people along the left and we have the questions they answered along the top. On the next tab, it tells us what those responses actually mean. And we're doing the usual stuff like count how many people said they were male and that sort of thing. So now let's take a look at the workbook for this stuff, see what types of questions we're answering. On the first page, it sort of breaks down all the tabs that we just went over. So I'm going to skip that for now. And at the top of the second page, this is really useful. This is the answers to that final tab. So this is after you fill out that spreadsheet. This is a great way to check your work. So don't type in these numbers. See if you're actually getting these numbers through your formulas or whatever. If you are, you're on the right track. And then the remainder of part 1 is broken down into question types. So like the first type is straightforward, just computational stuff. One weird thing is this last question is referencing the picture on the next page. It's just not spaced very well, but that's what it's referring to. Second question type has to do with some summation notation stuff, and then so on and so forth. With multiple types of problems. The last type, though, is a little bit weird as well. It basically just says there, in addition to these ones you've already completed, there might be others on the final exam itself. Just be aware of that. Like maybe they give a few examples. Maybe they could change some of these other things that are mentioned, but just be aware this is not all encompassing. This is just sort of a starting place. In part 2, once again, don't forget, you're going to download new data during the exam, but it will essentially be the same as this, just with different numbers. So when you're going through these and doing a COUNTIF or whatever, just make sure that you will be able to do that during the exam as well. And then as always, you got our little answer key in the back so you can check it.